It begins with the quiet hiss of a lantern on a dark Viennese street, a wavering light that casts shadows across the damp cobblestones. In that faint glow, you might picture a solitary figure hurrying past, head down, footsteps echoing through an empty alley. This is the kind of night where sinister deeds go unnoticed, and the whispers of a shocking secret drift on the wind. Imagine yourself there in those final moments before the truth emerges, before the city realizes that hidden among them is a woman capable of unspeakable acts. Martha Marek was not born into infamy. She came into the world in Austria in the early 1900s, a time of social upheaval, financial hardship, and the lingering scars of war. Hers was a childhood shaped by crumbling empires and shifting borders. The Austria of her youth was a shell-shocked nation reeling from the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, facing economic downturns and a restless populace. Resources were scarce, and hope was often scarcer. Yet, from these uncertain origins, Martha learned one lesson early. If security would not come freely, then she must seize it by any means. Imagine an 8-year-old Martha, already showing a resourcefulness beyond her years, bartering old clothes for scraps of food, gleaning fragments of adult conversations about the monarchy's downfall. She had a wry smile that might have seemed harmless at first glance, but those around her would later recall a sense of cunning behind her eyes. As she grew, she perfected the art of appearing charming, even trustworthy, while quietly looking for the next opportunity to get ahead. And in a world where survival often trumped morality, no one suspected that her innocent pleas for help or comfort might be a predatory trap. Her early adulthood followed the pattern of many young Viennese women at the time. She sought prospects for marriage and stability. It was then that she met her future husband, a man both naive and besotted by her lively manner. There are accounts that the two wed in a modest ceremony, watched over by those who hoped this union might bring both of them a brighter future. No one saw the slow currents of desperation that already pulled at Martha's mind. Yet, as time went on, the marriage would turn from promise to horror, propelled by a desperate desire for money and a willingness to do anything, even kill. It's said that one of the first suspicious moments came not in a grand spectacle, but in a small, unsettling detail. Martha's father-in-law fell inexplicably ill. Neighbors, seeing the old man shuffling around the apartment building, described him as perpetually tired, sometimes clutching his chest or complaining of agonizing stomach pains. Martha seemed dutiful, caring for him in his final days, preparing his meals, offering small spoonfuls of broth. And then, almost overnight, he died. At the time, people dismissed the loss as a natural passing. He was elderly, after all. But the inheritance he left behind, modest though it was, went immediately into Martha's grasp. How could anyone question a grieving daughter-in-law in a time of sorrow? Newly flush with a bit of money, Martha began to indulge in small luxuries. An elegant coat, slightly finer meals, the occasional trinket for her apartment. She carried herself with a confidence that flickered with a hungry edge. Yet in Vienna's parlors and shops, they only saw a grieving yet resilient woman, forging on after a family tragedy. But behind closed doors, the shadows of suspicion edged into the hush of late-night conversations. Her father-in-law's death had been abrupt, too abrupt, and the faint smell of bitterness had clung to the cups from which he sipped his final drinks. Time passed, as it often does, dissolving uneasy whispers until tragedy struck again. Her husband, once a slightly timid man who adored her, was found racked with a mysterious ailment. His hair thinned, and he complained of burning pains in his limbs. He lost weight rapidly, and yet doctors couldn't quite diagnose the cause. All the while, Martha was by his side, devoted, stroking his forehead with a damp cloth, administering medicine, preparing special meals. He died in agony, according to some accounts, calling out for relief, unsure of what was devouring him from the inside. In the swirl of funeral arrangements, it came to light that Martha had taken out an insurance policy on him. Once again, she found herself with a tidy sum, free to begin anew. Did anyone see the predator's eyes behind Martha's tears at the funeral? Some must have harbored doubts. But this was an era when widowhood and financial dependence often forced women into desperate acts, and few had the stomach to imagine a wife as a cold-blooded killer. "How could you accuse her?" was the common refrain. She lost her father-in-law and her husband in quick succession. She's a woman to be pitied, not blamed. Those rumors that did surface never quite reached the ears of the authorities. And so, Martha continued to move freely, her cunning wrapped in widow's garb. One might hope that the tragedy ended there, but as investigators would learn long afterward, her crimes only escalated. In a twist that still stirs horror, Martha targeted her own daughter next. The child was described by neighbors as bright-eyed, forever carrying a small doll or skipping rope near the building courtyard. She became ill in a similar manner, strange pains, a slow and agonizing decline. Martha tended to her, as any mother would, but behind those closed doors the signs were the same: thinning hair, trembling limbs, the endless confusions of a body under siege by poison. When the little girl died, hearts broke across the neighborhood. No one could fathom that a mother might be responsible for the agony of her own child. Grief can be powerful cover. No one wanted to be the person to interrogate a sobbing mother who lost her husband and daughter in short order. But if there was any single moment when the monstrous truth threatened to breach the surface, it was then. Some neighbors noticed that Martha didn't appear quite as shattered as one might expect, and soon after she left for a brief holiday trip, financed by insurance money taken out on her daughter's life. The mere thought of it was enough to raise suspicion, but few had the conviction to stand up and declare this might not be an ordinary tragedy. Authorities eventually got wind of the pattern, however. Whispers grew to murmurs, and then to loud allegations in certain circles. By this time, Martha was known to brag softly of her ability to land on her feet financially no matter what. In a candid moment overheard by a distant relative, she supposedly said something like, "If times get bad, we'll simply find a new way." The remark was cryptic, but in retrospect it dripped with ominous meaning. Her next move was to rent out a room in her apartment to a lodger who had fallen on hard times. This unsuspecting man, drawn by a friendly and welcoming Martha, had no idea the risk he was taking. Shortly after he moved in, the man began to complain of similar symptoms: an unrelenting queasiness, sudden stabs of pain, weakness in the legs. He tried to make jokes about it. Perhaps it was just the Viennese winter dampness or a bit of bad luck. Martha, ever the solicitous landlady, brought him herbal teas and warm meals, telling him to rest. But when these efforts only seemed to worsen his condition, his suspicion flickered. He confided in a friend that something in the taste of his food or drink was off. Too bitter, maybe, too metallic. He began to suspect that perhaps Martha's kindly caretaking was anything but. That friend, alarmed by the story and faint rumors swirling around Martha's past, quietly went to the police. And in a slow, careful manner, so as not to tip Martha off, an investigation began. The authorities realized they had enough to proceed when they uncovered her pattern of collecting insurance payouts following mysterious deaths. Even more telling, they found a stash of a substance believed to be rat poison in her apartment, carefully hidden away. It was eventually identified as a compound containing thallium, a lethal poison known for producing those exact hair-thinning, nerve-wracking symptoms in its victims. When news broke of Martha's arrest, Vienna was stunned. Neighbors who recalled her as a grieving widow and mother could hardly reconcile that image with the woman alleged to have systematically poisoned her own family. The media swarmed the courthouse, hungry for a sensational story, an Austrian counterpart to the most spine-chilling of fairy tales, in which the maternal figure is turned into a deadly menace. If you were to read the newspapers of that era, you'd find headlines referring to her as a seductive siren or a black widow spider, weaving traps to lure in her victims. Some accounts even described her cold composure during interrogations. While the many suspects trembled or wailed their innocence, Martha answered questions in a calm, almost detached manner, maintaining she was misunderstood, the victim of cruel coincidence. But the evidence mounted. There were records of suspicious pharmacy purchases, contradictory statements about her financial situation, testimonies from doctors who recalled peculiar poison-like symptoms. And then, the biggest blow, the exhumations. Investigators dug up the bodies of her father-in-law, her husband, and her daughter, performing tests that revealed high levels of toxic substances. Court records show that one of the prosecutors grimly stated something along the lines of, "The veil of tragedy is lifted, and in its place stands a calculated murderer." The trial quickly became a public spectacle. The courtroom thrummed with tension. Journalists from across Europe gathered to observe the face of a woman they claimed was the darkest female serial killer Austria had ever produced. Martha's counsel attempted to paint her as a wronged widow, implying that the doctors and neighbors were making mountains out of a series of unfortunate but unrelated deaths. She wept for the jury, playing the bereaved mother angle for all it was worth. But public sympathy was already running thin. The medical experts who testified did so with brutal clarity. There was no way to dismiss the presence of poison as a coincidence. Each death fit the same pattern, each time leaving Martha with a lucrative insurance payout. In one chilling exchange recalled by a court observer, Martha was asked directly by the prosecution whether she had prepared the final meal for her husband. She apparently hesitated for just a moment, fiddling with her gloves before replying, "I did what any good wife would do when her husband was ill." Her unemotional tone in that moment, they say, crystallized the case for many onlookers. She was found guilty on multiple counts of murder, with the press labeling her a manipulative killer who exploited society's empathy for grieving women. The day she was sentenced, some spectators reported seeing a flicker of panic in her eyes, an uncharacteristic departure from her otherwise composed demeanor. She was condemned to death, making her one of the first women in Austria to face the guillotine after the reinstitution of capital punishment in the 1930s. The city erupted with shock and relief all at once. Was it true that a mother could so callously send her daughter to an excruciating death? Did she deserve the ultimate penalty? The moral weight of that question hung in the air. Those who had cared for her victims were left in a cloud of disbelief. Some wrestled with guilt, wondering if they could have intervened sooner. A distant cousin who had babysat Martha's daughter from time to time recounted feeling an overwhelming sense of anguish, replaying every memory to see if there had been any sign, any chance to rescue the young girl. The emotional fallout was also palpable among local families. They locked their windows, worried if perhaps the face of evil had been disguised in someone they knew. Some neighbors fell into bouts of insomnia, haunted by nightmares of the child's final days and the possibility that they had inadvertently aided the killer by trusting her. The trial sparked heated controversy that spread far beyond the Viennese city limits. The press ran sensational headlines, and discussions flared in coffee houses and living rooms across Austria. Some argued that the social and economic pressures on women of that era were partly to blame, suggesting that Martha's quest for financial security, twisted though it was grew from a deeply flawed system. Others were outraged at any attempt to rationalize her acts, insisting that no hardship could justify murdering one's own child. Politically, the case became a grim symbol of why harsher measures were deemed necessary. Calls for stricter insurance regulations grew louder, with demands that large policies on family members be subject to more intensive scrutiny. Yet there were also those who opposed capital punishment altogether, pointing to Martha's case as proof that a society in turmoil often opts for the most brutal form of retribution. In the years following her execution, Martha's story lingered in the public memory. Journalists continued to reference her whenever a new poisoning scandal arose, as if to say, "Be careful, or we might have another Marek among us." Her notoriety shaped Austrian discourse on domestic crime, insurance fraud, and the perplexing capacity for evil in the most intimate of family settings. Cultural depictions emerged in plays and whispery radio dramas, with the villainous female figure loosely modeled on her. Some local historians argue that her case prompted a deeper awareness of mental health issues, pushing for greater insight into how desperation and psychopathy can intersect to produce unimaginable harm. On a more somber note, her story casts a long shadow in forensic circles, reminding investigators that the most shocking crimes can be hidden behind a veil of everyday normalcy. And now, if you stand at the threshold of that old Viennese building where she once lived, you might still feel the chill of her legacy. Passers-by sometimes say they sense an eerie stillness there, as if the walls themselves remember a sinister presence. Yet Martha's tale does not stand alone as a relic of a distant past. It remains an unsettling reminder of how easily appearances can deceive, and how the human mind can justify the most horrifying actions under the pressure of need or greed. Would you have seen through her mask of tears? Could anyone have intervened before it was too late? Those questions hover above the streets, echoing as a cautionary voice in a city that has seen its share of shadows. In the end, we are left with the image of a poised figure on the scaffold, offering no remorse, no last-minute confession to bring closure to grieving families. It challenges our assumptions about maternal instinct, about the boundaries of human empathy, and about how desperation can corrode even the most sacred bonds. As you consider Martha Marek's story, her chilling deeds, and the devastation she left behind, ask yourself, how well do we ever truly know the people who walk among us, and what hidden motives might dwell behind their most sorrowful smiles?